Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the work that you do. It's not an easy task by any means. I would note that in this day and age, I think it's unreasonable to expect Americans to think it's going to take them months to get a passport, particularly a passport renewal, because they can, if they apply for a credit card where they're going to get thousands of dollars of credit from a bank, they can get the card in days. And yet an American citizen who's had a passport for 50 years can wait months and months to get a passport. It just doesn't make sense. I think we may need to adjust our what the requirements are to get a renewal, what the technology is that we use to make that happen. I would also note that my home state of Utah is, if not the fastest growing state in America, close to the fastest growing state in America. The demand for consular services is enormous, in part because of the commerce there, but also because we have thousands upon thousands, some 50,000 missionaries leaving from Salt Lake City every year. And the Mountain West region, and particularly Salt Lake City, is in what I'll call a passport service desert. The nearest passport agencies which are required for in-person visits are some 8 hours away. We have, I listened to the chairman indicate that in New Jersey, population, how big is New Jersey, 10 million? 9 million. You know, my state's 1/3 that size, and yet we have 200 people right now that are working through my office for emergency help. We have 4 people in our office that are doing nothing besides emergency passport requests. And the number of concerns we have is an enormous list. And so I would encourage you to fulfill the legal responsibility in the law that was passed last year, asking for the State Department to report on the geographic diversity and accessibility of passport agencies. That's due in a couple of weeks, and I expect that you'll be able to perform that as required by law. And I know that you're anxious to make that happen. I would also hope that there's a way to increase staffing. Perhaps, I mean, I'd like to build offices with physical presence, but perhaps at least pilot projects of some kind that allow us to have individuals surged in areas like Salt Lake City or somewhere in the Intermountain West, Boise or wherever, where we can get services for people in the Intermountain West without having to drive as many as 8 hours for the needs for in-person views. I'd also note that in places like Israel, I thought it was interesting when they do the Homeland Security checks for Israel. They ask medical students, law students, people receiving student loans to surge capacity to do interviews. And I don't know what the opportunity is at the State Department to say, you know, we've got a lot of kids getting loans. We've got people in medical school. We've got people in law school. We could have them come in for summer work. If you have surges in the summer or the spring, train them, qualify them, pay them, bring them in. And have them help do some of the work that you're doing. I would note that I would expect the surge to continue to grow with the Paris Olympics next year. People are going to be wanting to go to the Olympics, wanting to go to Paris, and like most Americans, they think that if they got 3 or 4 weeks before they go, that they ought to be able to get their passport renewed. And they don't realize it's going to take 13 weeks because that's not the way anything else in America works. It's only dealing with government that things take this long. And so we basically have to get government to act more like some of the services we receive in the private sector. Finally, I would ask that if you have data that you look at to see how you're doing, average length of time for a renewal, average length of time for a first-time passport, percentage of people who can't get their passport within that average, how many are above, how long the delays are. If you have data of that nature, I would love to see it. I'd request that you provide it to this committee so that we can actually measure how we're doing. I'm sure you have that and you're able to look at it, how many applications you receive, but can we get granular data from you on how this system is working? I think we desperately need it, and hope that you will be able, one, to report on the progress towards a regional assessment of our needs, but two, information on how well we're performing. I know I didn't get a question in there, but I had a lot I wanted to say, and I think I see you nodding, so I'm assuming you find those things to be acceptable. Is that right?
Absolutely. And may I respond just very briefly?
You may, but I want to add one more.
Yes, please.
One more small thing. I won't ask the audience this, but if my passport says it's going to expire in 6 months, I would expect if I was going to leave, let's say when it's got 3 months left, that I could go to Mexico and come back. I think every American I know is shocked to find out that when your passport expires in 6 months that you can't leave the country. You have to include on the passport some kind of notice that says you may not leave the country if the passport expires within 6 months. And it may just be to some countries, but gosh, this is one of the reasons we have this huge backlog with emergency services. I'm sorry.
No, I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the feedback. And I think people are surprised by this 6-month requirement that a lot of countries have. So it's something that we include in our outreach, but clearly it's really hard to penetrate when people aren't thinking about it.
Put a sticker on the passport that says this will not be valid going into many countries if your passport expires within 6 months.
Yeah. We have QR codes that lead to our public information, but you're right, that's something very much that should be highlighted in particular because it is really surprising. I also just want to briefly highlight a couple of things, and thank you for raising the issue of geographic diversity. It's something we really monitor a lot. We collect a lot of data on it. There are, I can throw out statistics at you, which will be unsatisfying, but we think that the best way for us to be able to serve the American public is through modernizing our systems and being able to surge our hiring. It's really only about 5% of Americans who need access to emergency services for passports, and we do have procedures in place, and we work very hard, including with all of your staffs, for which we are enormously grateful, to make sure that we are aware of those cases and they're drawn to our attention. And sir, if there are cases in Salt Lake City that you need us to be aware of, we would really be grateful if you could set us up for success and let us know. The one other thing I want to say, and it's really true, hiring, we've increased our staff 10% this year, and we have more in the pipeline. These are national security, every passport's a national security decision, and bringing folks on in these positions, hiring, training, clearing, and making sure that they are suitable to have this really challenging job with a great deal of responsibility does take time. And it's something that we're working at very, very closely, and we're grateful, really grateful, to the support of Congress in expanding our spending authorities and allowing us to be able to move funding more flexibly to be able to continue that hiring. So I want to end with thanks, not just for the feedback, but also for all of the support.
Just two final notes. 50 is the present backlog. We have a continuously process of closing them successfully, many. So if I were to say how many do we get over the course of a year, probably over 1,000. But 15% of 15% though of the American people who may need emergency services. Is that what you said? 15%?
I'm sorry, sir. It was 5%.
5%. I'm sorry. 5% of the, as I was calculating, is about 15 million people. That's still a lot of people.